Hey guys, tonight we begin with a structure. One so massive, so technically absurd, and so unapologetically Roman that it still makes modern engineers squint. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's hazy little history together. If you want to understand the Colosseum, you can't start with architecture journals or engineering diagrams. The birth of a monumental machine. You are standing in the soft morning light of ancient Rome, long before the roar of the crowds, long before the scent of sweat and excitement fills the air. The Colosseum, in its earliest years, appears not as a ruin, but as a sprawling construction site buzzing with an orderly kind of chaos. The dust is everywhere, fine, chalk-colored, clinging to hair and tunics, settling into corners of the stone blocks that will one day become the most recognizable silhouette of Roman entertainment. And as you look closer, you begin to understand that this enormous building was not merely a stage for gladiators. It was a machine, one carefully engineered to move thousands of people, animals, props, scenery, and even water with astonishing efficiency. The story of the Colosseum begins in the aftermath of a tyrant. Emperor Nero had taken a vast swath of Rome and converted it into his private pleasure estate, complete with an artificial lake, gardens, and a golden palace. The Roman public despised this indulgence, especially because much of the land Nero seized had once been open for the people to gather and live. When Nero died and the Flavian dynasty took power, the new emperor, Vespasian, recognized an opportunity, not just to build a monument, but to restore Rome's soul. He drained Nero's lake and chose that very spot to construct a massive amphitheater for the people. A symbolic gesture, meaningful yet quietly practical. As you observe the early engineers and laborers at work, you see that this project was unlike any other. The team in charge was not made up only of architects and builders. It included mathematicians, surveyors, quarry specialists, timber workers, rope handlers, and even bureaucratic scribes who documented every stone, every wage, every shipment of materials. Their daily activities were arguably far more tedious than the battles that would one day be staged here, but their work built the foundation of the Colosseum's awe-inspiring presence. The Romans began with a massive ring-shaped foundation made of concrete, a material they perfected long before the rest of the world realized its potential. You can imagine the workers mixing volcanic ash, lime, and various aggregates in enormous pits, stirring the mixture by hand with wooden paddles as large as rowing oars. The mixture produced a concrete that could set underwater, an essential property given that the site had once been a lake. The foundation had to be strong enough to support not just stone and marble, but the weight of tens of thousands of spectators. As the foundation dried, surveyors paced out the shape of the arena with ropes and wooden stakes. Every angle had to be precise. The Colosseum's oval design was chosen deliberately. It allowed the crowd to sit closer to the action, prevented dead zones where sound disappeared, and created an even distribution of pressure around the structure. These were not decisions made for beauty. They were quietly practical, based on mathematics and experience gathered from smaller amphitheaters across the empire. You watch a team of stonecutters shaping travertine blocks hauled from quarries about 20 miles outside Rome. These blocks, some weighing more than several tons, arrived at the site on massive wooden carts pulled by teams of oxen. The drivers cracked their whips, not in anger at the animals, but to encourage rhythmic movement, because a consistent pace prevented the wooden wheels from snapping. Wheelwrights, in fact, stayed on site for the entire duration of construction, repairing axles and reinforcing rims as the steady grind of supply carts wore them down. The stonecutters' work is slow, repetitive, and astonishingly methodical. They measure each block, carve it, smooth it, and then test fit it with neighboring pieces. The Colosseum's distinctive arches begin to rise one by one, each supported by wooden scaffolding that seems too flimsy for the task. Yet Roman carpenters understood tension and weight distribution better than most civilizations of their time. They knew how to lash beams into firm lattice structures, how to brace temporary supports against uneven ground, and how to recycle wood over and over to minimize cost. Each arch was more than decoration. They served as structural reinforcements that distributed the load evenly, while also creating the iconic tiered entrances that allowed 50,000 spectators to enter and exit within minutes, a feat many modern stadiums struggle to match. The Romans even held small flow rehearsals, where teams of workers simulated crowds moving through corridors to assess where traffic might bottleneck. Adjustments were made, often subtle. A corridor widened here, a stairway given a gentler incline there. These quiet calibrations, easily overlooked by history, transformed the Colosseum into a marvel of crowd management. As the exterior took shape, another team worked on the most complex internal system, the hypogeum. This underground network of tunnels and chambers would someday house gladiators, wild animals, mechanical lifts, trapdoors, and stage machinery. But in these early days, all you see are corridors being carved out of the earth and reinforced with stone and timber. Engineers mark the pathways with charcoal on wooden planks. They debate ventilation, drainage, and the placement of hoists. One overseer, standing with a wax tablet in hand, gestures at a narrow channel carved into the floor. "We cannot have water pooling here," he mutters. "If the animals slip, the entire performance is disrupted." His comment, mundane as it sounds, reveals the heart of Roman engineering. They planned for everything. Safety was not a form of compassion, but practicality. A single glitch in the machinery could ruin a show witnessed by emperors and foreign dignitaries. The hypogeum was built not for comfort, but for efficiency, and its design was continuously tested and improved. Meanwhile, the builders worked in layers. Once the first tier of arches was completed, they moved upward to construct the second tier, then the third. Each level required a different type of stone and mortar, chosen carefully based on the weight it needed to carry. The top tier was lighter, allowing the Colosseum to rise without overburdening its foundation. The Romans understood that using heavy travertine all the way to the top would have shortened the structure's lifespan and increased the risk of collapse. You notice workers installing a series of small square holes along the upper walls. At first, they seemed decorative, But their purpose becomes clear when you observe another team assembling wooden beams nearby. These beams will fit into those holes and support a massive canvas awning known as the velarium. This awning, operated by sailors from the Imperial fleet, would someday shield spectators from the sun. The engineering behind it was extraordinary. Ropes, pulleys, and rigging systems designed with the same precision used on Roman warships. The awning was not merely stretched across the stadium. It required constant adjustment to prevent snapping in the wind. As you watch these preparations, you realize how deeply interconnected Roman labor was. Sailors, carpenters, stonecutters, engineers, rope makers, metal workers, and scribes all had roles in the Colosseum's creation. Most of the work was slow, repetitive, and rarely celebrated. Yet each task was essential. In the courtyard adjacent to the construction site, scribes sit beneath shaded awnings, documenting each day's labor. They record how many stones arrived, how much lime was used, how many workers were paid, how many carts broke an axle, and even how many nails were forged by blacksmiths during the week. These records were critical. They ensured materials weren't stolen, budgets weren't exceeded, and work proceeded according to the emperor's schedule. The scribes' wax tablets held the quiet power of accountability. Without them, the project could have descended into corruption or delays. Their routines were mundane but vital. Every evening they melted the wax slightly and smoothed it over to prepare for the next day's entries. Meanwhile, blacksmiths labored nearby, forging iron clamps and dowels used to hold the stones together. The Romans often used metal to reinforce masonry, a precursor to modern reinforced concrete. The clamps ensured that even if an earthquake struck, and they often did, the stones would resist shifting. As the skeleton of the Colosseum grew, Rome itself buzzed with anticipation. Street vendors speculated about the kinds of games that would be held. Merchants planned to set up stalls nearby, hoping to profit from the crowds. But many ordinary Romans were simply fascinated by the construction process. They wandered past the site to watch workers lift stones with cranes operated by tread wheels. Large wooden wheels turned by men walking inside them like human hamsters. These cranes could lift several tons with relatively little human effort, one of the most elegant pieces of Roman machinery. You imagine a young Roman child watching those massive stones rise into the sky and wondering how such feats were possible. To him, it must have seemed like magic. But to the engineers, the process was simply the result of careful mathematics, predictable physics, and generations of practice. As months turned into years, the Colosseum neared completion. The interior seating took shape, built with tiered stone steps that formed a perfect gradient from the arena floor to the highest seats. The seating arrangement was strictly hierarchical. Senators at the front, wealthy citizens in the middle, common Romans above them, and enslaved people or foreigners at the very top. The Colosseum was both a marvel of engineering and a reflection of Roman society, a place where the hierarchy of an empire was carved into stone. By the time Vespasian's son, Titus, became emperor, the Colosseum stood ready for its inauguration. But imagine standing there before the first games were held, looking at the structure in its pristine glory. You see not the blood that would later stain its sands, but the careful planning, the patient labor, and the quiet brilliance that made it possible. And as you take in the long shadow it casts across Rome, you cannot help wondering what hidden mechanisms, still unseen beneath the arena's surface, waited to reveal themselves in the years to come. When you return to the Colosseum in your imagination, the sun is higher in the sky, casting long, sharp shadows over the massive outer arches. The exterior is complete now, its tiers of stone rising like a giant's ribcage above the surrounding streets of Rome. But today, you are not looking at the sunlight. You are being guided into the shadows, into the quiet, intricate world beneath the arena floor, where the true ingenuity of Roman engineering reveals itself. You descend a series of stone steps leading into the Hypogeum, the underground complex that once lay hidden from the eyes of spectators. Few people know that the Hypogeum was not part of the Colosseum's original construction. It was added later, under Emperor Domitian, as the games grew more complex and demanded more elaborate staging. Before its construction, the arena floor had occasionally been flooded for mock naval battles. But the Hypogeum changed everything. It transformed the Colosseum from a simple amphitheater into a living machine. As you step into the dim corridor, your eyes adjust to the faint glow of oil lamps resting in small niches carved into the stone. The air is cool and slightly damp, carrying the earthy scent of timber beams, old rope, and the ever-present dust of limestone. Small puddles gather in uneven corners, a reminder of the constant struggle against groundwater that Roman engineers worked so tirelessly to manage. At first, all you see are two long parallel corridors running beneath where the arena floor once stood. But the longer you stand there, the more details emerge. Chambers branching out like veins, vertical shafts rising toward the arena floor above you, and narrow passageways built for quick movement. This is where gladiators waited, where animals paced in cramped pens, and where stagehands, unseen by any spectator, operated the machinery that powered the spectacles. A soft clanking echoes in the distance. You imagine workers testing a lift mechanism. The sound comes from a wooden treadmill crane powered by two slaves walking inside a massive wheel. Their slow, rhythmic steps turn the wheel, pulling thick ropes that connect to a vertical platform rising toward the surface. The lift itself is simple, a wooden frame reinforced with iron brackets, resting on a system of pulleys and guided by greased wooden runners. But what makes it impressive is its placement and purpose. There were roughly 60 of these vertical lifts throughout the Hypogeum. Some were large enough to transport a bear or lion. Others were narrow shafts designed for a single gladiator. Every platform had to rise smoothly and precisely into a trapdoor above, timed perfectly to the cues of the game's master. A misaligned lift, or a trapdoor that opened too slowly, could ruin the drama of a performance. The Romans understood this deeply, and so the lifts were tested again and again before the games began, with workers making adjustments to rope tension, pulley alignment, and lubrication of the wooden tracks. You trace your fingers along a groove in the wall where thick ropes once dragged up and down. The surface is worn smooth, evidence of years of operation. Roman rope makers used hemp and flax, twisting the fibers tightly and sealing them with pitch to prevent fraying. The ropes needed to be strong enough to lift several hundred pounds repeatedly, and yet light enough for workers to manage. Walking deeper into the hypogeum, you encounter animal pens, rectangular spaces marked by iron rings hammered into the floor. These rings once held chains that secured lions, leopards, bears, and even more exotic creatures brought from distant regions of the empire. You can imagine the restless movements of a caged leopard pacing in a circle, its claws clicking against the stone, its breath creating small clouds of condensation in the cool air. Handlers, known as bestiarii, were responsible for feeding, calming, and preparing these animals before their appearance in the arena. They worked in difficult conditions, surrounded by the constant threat of escape or aggression. The pens were deliberately narrow, not to punish the animals, but to keep them from building too much momentum should they attempt to attack their handlers. Details like these reveal not cruelty but practicality, a recurring theme in Roman engineering. Near the pens, you find a narrow wooden staircase leading to a cramped chamber above. This room was used by the stage coordinators, men who interpreted the cues from the crowd and the emperor and signaled to the workers below to prepare the next scene. A system of wooden shutters and slits allowed them to glance at the arena floor without being seen. Every spectacle was a production, carefully choreographed long before modern theater came into existence. The Romans were masters of creating illusion and controlling attention. While the hypogeum was hidden, its operations shaped every moment of the games. Animals could appear as if from nowhere. Gladiators could emerge through trapdoors as though rising from the underworld. Even entire sets, painted wooden trees, fake rocks, or battlefield props, could be lifted into position in a matter of seconds. This efficiency came from a carefully divided labor force. As you explore further, you notice a series of chalk markings on the walls, symbols, numbers, and arrows. These were not graffiti, they were instructions. Workers were assigned to specific lifts or corridors, and the symbols indicated which mechanism they operated during particular segments of the games. The system resembled a backstage blueprint, a quiet order beneath the chaos of the spectacle. In another corner of the hypogeum, you discover drainage channels carved into the floor. These channels connected to Rome's vast Cloaca Maxima, one of the earliest and most efficient sewer systems in the world. The channels carried away rainwater, animal waste, and the fluids from cleaning the arena floor after each event. Without this drainage, the hypogeum would have become a flooded, unsanitary pit. The engineers designed the channels with slight gradients so that water flowed naturally toward the city's sewer lines. The work was simple, yet essential. Above you, the arena floor, made of thick wooden planks covered in sand, once filtered sound and light into the hypogeum. Workers listening below could tell when a battle was nearing its end by the rhythm of the crowd's cheers or the movement of combat above, but they rarely saw daylight. Most of their lives were spent underground, performing tasks that were repetitive, tiring, and seldom acknowledged. You turn toward a long central corridor known as the spina, the spine of the hypogeum. This was the busiest passageway, used for transporting gladiators from their holding rooms to the lifts. You imagine the tense silence of these men as they waited, hearing only the creaking of machinery and the distant roar of the crowd. Their survival depended not only on skill, but on the flawless functioning of the mechanisms around them. A jammed lift could throw off timing, revealing a gladiator too early or too late. Even such small mishaps could affect the outcome of a fight. The spina led to a doorway that once opened directly onto the gladiators' training grounds, just outside the Colosseum. Here, fighters practiced under the guidance of Lanisti, trainers responsible for their diets, routines, and overall condition. The Lanisti were often former gladiators themselves, possessing deep knowledge of the weapons, strategies, and endurance required to survive in the arena. You step back into the hypogeum and notice a ladder leading to a higher corridor. This upper level housed a sophisticated system of pulleys and counterweights, used not only for lifts but also for controlling the velarium, the massive awning that shaded the spectators. The ropes that operated the velarium extended from giant masts placed around the top of the Colosseum. Sailors from the Imperial fleet oversaw its movement, adjusting tension based on wind direction and strength. The coordination between ground workers and sailors was essential. A sudden gust of wind could rip the fabric or snap the ropes, potentially injuring hundreds of people. As you continue exploring, you begin to appreciate the interconnectedness of Rome's engineering. Nothing existed in isolation. The hypogeum required reliable timber suppliers, skilled rope makers, precise metal workers, disciplined laborers, and administrators who coordinated the entire network. The complexity of this project becomes more impressive the deeper you travel into the structure, and the more you recognize how much human effort was invested into every detail. Along the walls, you find evidence of subtle adjustments. Extra wedges inserted under beams, replacement planks nailed into old frameworks, and patches of stone where repairs were made. The Colosseum was not a static monument. It evolved constantly. Workers were stationed in the hypogeum even during games, ready to repair anything that malfunctioned. They carried spare ropes, wedges, nails, and lubricating oils. They moved quietly and efficiently, like engineers maintaining a great machine in motion. In one section of the hypogeum, you notice a peculiar mechanism, a pivoting wooden panel with iron hinges. This was part of a series of rotating trapdoors that allowed multiple lifts to feed onto the same arena opening. The panel directed which lift would emerge at a given time, enabling rapid scene changes. A team of workers stood ready at all times to swing the panels into place. The timing required precision. 1 second too early, and a gladiator might bump into the mechanism. 1 second too late, and the illusion of sudden appearance was broken. You pause and listen. The Colosseum is silent now, but you can almost imagine the noise of a game day. The muffled thump of hooves from animals above, the shouts of gladiators preparing for combat, the creak of pulley wheels turning. The hypogeum was alive during events, a hidden ecosystem of labor that made the spectacle possible. As you walk toward the rear of the structure, you find a long, narrow tunnel that once connected to the gladiators' barracks and, further still, to the Ludus Magnus, the largest gladiator training school in Rome. This tunnel allowed fighters to move directly into the Colosseum without being seen by crowds. The secrecy protected them from harassment and preserved the drama of their appearance. Somewhere along the walls of this corridor, you notice faint etchings, names, tally marks, simple drawings. These marks were likely carved by gladiators waiting for their turn in the arena. They may have been signatures, reminders to themselves, or symbols of courage. Most gladiators lived short lives, and these quiet carvings may be among the only traces they left behind. Standing in the dimness of the hypogeum, you begin to understand why the Romans saw this place as more than entertainment. It was a demonstration of order, discipline, and ingenuity, values the empire claimed as its strengths. Everything in the Colosseum, even the parts unseen by the public, was built to reinforce the idea that Rome could orchestrate life and death with unmatched precision. As you prepare to leave the underground maze, one final thought lingers. How many hidden mechanisms, routines, and forgotten workers kept this monumental machine running flawlessly for centuries? And how many of their stories remain buried beneath the arena floor, waiting to be uncovered? The Colosseum in motion, a day at the games. When you step once more into ancient Rome, the Colosseum is no longer being built, nor is it waiting in silence. Now, it is alive, fully awakened, breathing through the movement of thousands of people pouring through its many entrances. For the first time, you see the monumental stadium not as a construction site or an empty shell, but as the machine of spectacle it was always meant to be. The sun climbs above the horizon, bathing the marble and travertine facade in a warm glow. You stand among the early crowds, listening to the murmurs of anticipation. Romans arrive in waves, senators with their attendants, merchants carrying baskets of food, families shepherding excited children, enslaved workers carrying cushions for their masters, and foreigners drawn by rumors of Rome's unmatched entertainment. Every social rank has its designated path, each entrance calibrated by Roman planners to maintain order. You join the flow of ordinary citizens entering through the middle arches, and the efficiency of Rome's crowd management becomes immediately clear. The corridors, known as vomitoria, are angled and spaced so that tens of thousands of people can move through them swiftly. Despite the name, they were not associated with sickness. The term simply meant to spew forth, describing the speed with which the crowd could enter or exit. Within minutes, you find yourself in the bright, open arena. Above you, the Valerium, a massive canvas awning, stretches across the sky like a sail captured mid-motion. Sailors from the imperial fleet stand atop the Colosseum, adjusting the ropes to keep the shade taut. You can hear faint commands being shouted from mast to mast, the system operating much like a ship. The ropes creak under tension, and when the wind shifts, the sailors respond immediately, easing one line and tightening another. The seating tiers ripple with life. People settle into stone benches, fanning themselves with woven palm leaves or adjusting their tunics. Vendors walk the aisles carrying dried fruits, honey cakes, wine diluted with herbs, and small figurines of gladiators. Children grip their parents' arms with excitement. Older citizens complain about the crowds, and groups of friends argue about which gladiator will win the day's contests. Below, the arena floor is meticulously prepared. Thick layers of sand spread evenly over wooden planks absorb the blood that will flow later. Workers rake the sand into place, testing the firmness of each section. Metalsmiths adjust weapon racks prepared for the upcoming fights. The arena is quiet for now, but you can feel the tension building beneath your feet, deep in the hypogeum, where the machinery is already in motion. Suddenly, a trumpet sounds. It is the clear, commanding call that signals the start of the day's events. You watch as Roman officials, clad in white togas bordered with purple stripes, step into view. The crowd quiets. The emperor enters his special box seat with a short procession, and thousands rise in greeting. With a gentle wave of his hand, the games begin. And immediately, you realize something crucial. Everything you see above is synchronized with the hidden world below. The first event is a grand procession, meant to honor the gods and showcase the participants. Gladiators, musicians, handlers, and performers cross the arena in well-rehearsed order. Their costumes are impressive, but what truly fascinates you is the choreography, the way each group moves with precision, the way timing guides every step. It becomes clear that behind this spectacle lies a network of signals and cues that travel through the hypogeum. Workers beneath the arena listen for sound patterns, trumpet notes, footfalls, or stones tapped rhythmically on the floor. Each cue instructs them when to prepare a lift, open a gate, or move a gladiator into position. The coordination is so seamless that the audience rarely senses the complexity that underlies each transition. Once the procession ends, the morning's animal exhibitions begin. These displays involve creatures from the far reaches of the empire. Lions from North Africa, bears from the mountains of Europe, ostriches from the Sahara, and even elephants from distant territories. The crowd cheers as handlers guide the first group of animals into view. But the true marvel lies just beneath your feet. Below, in the hypogeum, you imagine handlers coaxing animals into wooden cages placed atop one of the 60 lifting platforms. Workers turn the tread wheel, and the lift rises with mechanical steadiness. When the trapdoor swings open, the cage emerges in perfect synchronization with the music above. The front panel of the cage is unlatched, and the animal bursts into the arena with an energy that delights the crowd. Each lift is timed carefully. The engineers below have rehearsed these motions countless times, compensating for rope elasticity, the weight of each animal, and the friction of wooden tracks. They understand that a delayed appearance disrupts the rhythm of the games. So they work quietly and precisely, guiding each lift with practiced motions. In one sequence, several lifts rise simultaneously, releasing wolves, deer, and exotic birds into a carefully choreographed hunt. Skilled archers demonstrate their precision, firing arrows that barely graze the animals before striking padded targets placed behind them. These displays are meant to show Roman mastery over nature, as well as the artisanship behind their weapons. But every dramatic moment depends on the unseen workers below. They reset mechanisms, reposition animals, and ensure that each trapdoor closes cleanly. When a lift is lowered, workers immediately reload it for future scenes. The process resembles a backstage crew in a modern theater, efficient, disciplined, and essential. As the morning progresses, the exhibitions grow more ambitious. You see a mock forest rise from the arena floor. Not real trees, but wooden constructs painted with remarkable detail. They emerge through the same lifts used for animals, their bases locked into channels beneath the sand. Workers below push them through rotating trapdoors, ensuring they align with the pre-dug slots above. Now the arena is transformed into a woodland scene. A small herd of antelope enters from another lift, followed by a group of trained dogs guided by handlers. The chase begins, carefully staged to mimic a natural hunt. Some animals slip into hidden openings, shafts that lead directly back into the hypogeum. There, workers soothe them, feed them, or prepare them for transportation. Romans, surprisingly, often used the same animals for multiple shows, minimizing unnecessary loss of life. After the animal shows, the midday intermission allows spectators to stretch, purchase food, or discuss the events so far. You hear fragments of conversation around you. Praise for a skilled archer, complaints about the price of honey cakes, predictions about the gladiatorial matches to come. The hum of life fills every corner of the stadium. Meanwhile, the real work begins below. The hypogeum prepares for the afternoon's main events, gladiator contests. Workers remove the mock forest, lowering tree props into the chambers below. They sift fresh sand onto the arena floor, raking it evenly. They check the tension of ropes, replace any worn pulleys, and realign lifts. The coordination is remarkable, every action performed with quiet urgency. In the gladiators' preparation rooms connected to the hypogeum, fighters clad in different styles of armor, secutors, murmillos, retiarii, Thracians, wait for their turns. They stretch, adjust their gear, and listen for the signal that will call them to the lifts. Some fighters lean against the walls with calm expressions, hardened by years of training. Others murmur short prayers or run whetstones along the edges of their blades. Their fates, to a surprising degree, depend on the reliability of the mechanisms below. A delayed lift could affect a gladiator's concentration. A misaligned trapdoor could force him to enter the arena at an awkward angle. The engineers and workers know this, and they dedicate themselves to ensuring smooth transitions. Above, the emperor raises his hand again, and the crowd quiets. The first pair of gladiators is announced. Their names echo across the arena, and excitement ripples through the audience. The arena floor seems calm, but you sense the tension building beneath the planks. Then, almost imperceptibly, the sand shifts. A square of the arena floor lifts upward, pushed by a rising platform. A gladiator appears, emerging from the underworld like a spirit summoned for battle. His opponent rises from another trapdoor. The crowd erupts. The combat begins. You watch the fighters move with precision, trained, disciplined, and deeply aware of their surroundings. Their movements kick up sand. Their weapons clash with sharp metallic timbers, and their breaths become heavy as they exchange blows. The crowd roars with every strike, every dodge, every moment of apparent weakness. But while your attention is fixed on the fighters, the workers below are already preparing the next sequence. They listen for shifts in the crowd's tone, predicting when the match will end. They reposition other fighters, prepare another lift, and coordinate with the handlers responsible for opening arena-side gates. When the match ends, whether by surrender, injury, or the emperor's signal, the victor salutes the crowd. The defeated fighter is carried off the field through a side gate, disappearing into the network of corridors below. Medical attendants, or, depending on fate, body handlers, wait to assess the fallen. The process repeats again and again, each match blending seamlessly into the next. You begin to notice the subtle rhythm of the Colosseum, the rise of a lift, the crash of a weapon, the shift of the Valerium's ropes, the murmurs of spectators, the shouts of workers below, the thump of heavy trapdoors closing. This place functions like a living organism, each part contributing to the whole. As the sun begins its descent, the games draw toward their dramatic conclusion. The final match often features the most skilled gladiators or the most elaborate setting. Workers below prepare props, check mechanisms one last time, and gather signals from the stage coordinators. The emperor gives the final gesture. The arena plunges into a breathtaking scene. Perhaps it is a reenactment of a famous battle, or a fight involving exotic animals, or a duel between two gladiators whose rivalry has captured Rome's imagination. Whatever the scenario, the engineering supports every moment. The lifts rising in perfect sequence, the trapdoors snapping open and shut like pieces of a vast theatrical puzzle. When the final match ends, the crowd erupts into a thunderous applause that reverberates through stone and timber. Romans begin to file out of the stadium, their footsteps echoing through vomitoria and stairwells. Above, the Valerium is slowly retracted. Below, workers begin dismantling props, cleaning floors, and reloading machinery. Their tasks continue long after the spectators return to their homes. As the last of the sunlight fades, the Colosseum returns to its quiet form, a massive, slumbering machine resting until the next day's spectacle calls it to life again. And you cannot help asking yourself, how did such a sophisticated system endure for centuries, adapting to new rulers, new demands, and new audiences without ever revealing the full extent of its complexity to the world above? Decline, ruin, and the quiet legacy of Rome's greatest amphitheater. As night settles over ancient Rome, the Colosseum grows quiet again. The crowds disperse, oil lamps dim, and the massive awning is fully retracted. The arena lies still, its sands smoothed once more, its machinery reset for another day. But in your mind, time begins to accelerate. You stand where you are, and centuries pass before your eyes. The Colosseum, this vibrant machine of spectacle, will not remain in perfect working order forever. Like all human creations, it will age, change, and eventually fall into ruin. And yet, even in its decline, it will continue to influence architecture, engineering, and the understanding of public entertainment for thousands of years. Today, in this final section, you witness not only its slow deterioration, but the enduring legacy it leaves behind, through quiet traces carved into stone and buried beneath centuries of dust. Your journey begins in the early 2nd century, sometime after the great inaugurations hosted by Emperors Titus and Domitian. The Colosseum is at its peak. The marble is still bright. The statues adorning its many arches gleam in the sunlight, and the roar of the crowds remains a central feature of Roman public life. The hypogeum machinery is in constant motion, maintained by a dedicated crew of engineers and laborers. Each day, workers inspect the tension of ropes, test pulleys, reinforce wooden frames, and replace worn parts. The Colosseum breathes like a giant mechanical beast, kept alive through endless maintenance. But gradually, subtle changes begin to emerge. As you move through time, Cracks appear in the arches, small at first, almost invisible, but Rome's engineers record them in their logbooks. They do not panic. The city has experienced earthquakes before. Repair crews patch damaged stones, reinforce weakened pillars, and restore sections of the seating area. Life in the city continues unchanged. However, by the 3rd century, Rome itself begins to shift. Political instability, economic strain, and external pressures slowly erode the unity of the empire. The Colosseum remains a symbol of Rome's grandeur, but the frequency and scale of the games begin to fluctuate. Emperors struggling for power use the games to gain public favor, but resources are no longer as abundant as they once were. You stand outside the Colosseum during a period of unrest. Food shortages strike the city, military campaigns drain the treasury, and the once steady flow of exotic animals dwindles. The complex logistics required to transport elephants, tigers, or crocodiles across continents become increasingly difficult. Gradually, the spectacles grow smaller. Gladiator schools struggle to maintain their fighters. The once bustling hypogeum becomes quieter between events, its workers waiting longer for the next show. Even as the empire faces turmoil, engineers continue to maintain the Colosseum. Their work becomes more challenging as funds shrink. Repairs that once took weeks now take months. Wooden beams in the hypogeum grow older, requiring more frequent reinforcement. But the Colosseum still stands, its structure resilient, its design far ahead of its time, its foundation strong enough to endure the centuries. Then, in the year 217 CE, disaster strikes. A massive fire, caused by lightning, rips through the Colosseum. Flames devour the wooden arena floor and much of the hypogeum's machinery. The lifts, pulleys, and trapdoors, once so precise and finely tuned, collapse into charred fragments. The Colosseum becomes inoperable overnight. You walk through its smoking corridors, smelling the burnt timber, hearing the crackle of dying embers. Workers sift through the debris, assessing what can be salvaged. Engineers write reports describing the damage: destroyed lift assemblies, collapsed support beams, melted iron fittings. The once sophisticated mechanisms lie in ruins. It will take decades to repair. During this time, the Colosseum sits partially damaged, a shadow of its former self. The Roman people walk past it daily, mourning the absence of their beloved games. Some emperors attempt to allocate funds for restoration, but political challenges delay progress. The hypogeum remains silent, filled with broken machinery and shattered beams. Still, the stone structure endures. Its arches survive. Its seating terraces stand firm. And eventually, after half a century, repairs begin again. Carpenters reassemble wooden floors. Blacksmiths forge new iron brackets. Rope makers twist new cables for the platforms. The hypogeum slowly returns to life, but it will never again reach the complexity and precision of its Flavian-era design. As the centuries continue, Rome transforms. Christianity rises, reshaping values and attitudes. Gladiatorial combat, once a celebrated tradition, gradually falls out of favor. By the 5th century, the games grow rare. The emperors no longer sponsor grand spectacles. Funds for maintenance diminish. The hypogeum receives fewer repairs. Some machinery is dismantled for scrap. Other parts are left to rot. Nature begins to reclaim the Colosseum. Grass sprouts between the stones. Birds nest in the upper arches. The velarium's rope anchors rust and break. The seating terraces crack. Without constant upkeep, a structure of this size inevitably begins to crumble. You walk through the hypogeum one last time while it still retains its ghostly outline. The lift shafts remain, but the platforms have collapsed. The rotating trapdoors are gone, leaving jagged holes in the floor above. The carved markings on the walls, the instructions, symbols, and worker notes fade under layers of dust. A century later, the Colosseum faces another devastating blow. In the year 443 CE, an earthquake shakes Rome. The southern side of the amphitheater collapses partially, sending stone blocks tumbling into the streets below. Engineers are no longer present to repair the damage. The once great structure begins to shift from a place of entertainment to a source of building material. Romans, needing stone for construction, begin quarrying the Colosseum itself. Marble is stripped from its facade, iron clamps are pried out, and travertine blocks are removed to reinforce other structures throughout the city. The Colosseum becomes a ruin, but not a forgotten one. Medieval Romans repurpose it in unexpected ways. Some families build houses within its walls. Artisans set up workshops in the corridors. The hypogeum, once filled with machinery, becomes a warren of storerooms and stables. The arena floor collapses entirely, exposing the underground chambers to the open sky. Rainwater pours in, turning the hypogeum into a lush microecosystem of shrubs, moss, and unusual plant species brought unintentionally from all corners of the empire. You stroll through it centuries later, now overgrown with wild vegetation. Scholars in the 18th century will catalog more than 400 plant species growing in the ruins. The hypogeum becomes a botanical wonder, its old engineering long overwhelmed by nature's quiet persistence. As the medieval world evolves, the Colosseum shifts again in purpose. It becomes a fortress at one point, then a religious site, then a quarry once more. Its identity changes as Rome itself changes. Yet, through all the transformations, the core of the structure remains recognizable. The towering arches, the elliptical footprint, the echoes of a once perfectly orchestrated machine. Slowly, admiration for ancient Rome begins to return. During the Renaissance, artists and architects study the Colosseum closely, drawing its arches, measuring its symmetry, and marveling at its design. They see it not as a ruin, but as a blueprint. The amphitheater's proportions influence theaters, palaces, and civic buildings across Europe. Generations of architects learn from its arches, its load-bearing principles, and its clever distribution of weight. The Colosseum's engineering, once meant to serve a single city, now inspires the world. When you reach the modern era, the Colosseum becomes one of the world's most studied archaeological sites. Researchers uncover the remnants of the hypogeum, reconstructing its mechanisms, identifying the positions of lifts, trapdoors, and machinery. Engineers analyze the structure's resilience. Historians map the daily lives of workers, gladiators, and craftsmen. Tourists from every nation walk through its arches, unaware that beneath their feet once lay one of the most complex staging systems ever built in antiquity. And you notice something striking. Even in ruin, the Colosseum continues to teach. It teaches about Roman engineering, how precise, practical, and forward-thinking it was. It teaches about human labor, the countless unnamed workers who shaped its stones and operated its mechanisms. It teaches about resilience, not just the structures, but the resilience of knowledge passed from one generation to the next. You see visitors leaning over railings to peer down into the exposed hypogeum. They marvel at the chambers, corridors, and shafts, the hidden spaces that once made the arena come alive. They are witnessing the bones of a machine stripped bare by time, and yet still impressive in its complexity. Architects sketch the arches, recognizing in them the foundations of modern stadium design. Engineers study the hypogeum and marvel at Rome's early mastery of mechanical lifts. Historians reflect on how entertainment, politics, and engineering intertwined in ancient Rome. And you realize that although the Colosseum no longer functions as it once did, its legacy moves quietly through every modern sports arena, theater, or stadium designed with crowd flow in mind. Its influence extends far beyond its stone ruins. As you stand before the Colosseum in its present form, weathered, broken, yet undeniably majestic, you cannot help but feel that it is more alive than ever. Not as a machine of spectacle, but as a monument of human ingenuity. A reminder that even the most ordinary labor, the quarrying of stone, the tightening of rope, the turning of a tread wheel, can shape history in ways that echo for millennia. And so a final question lingers in your mind, quiet but persistent. What other hidden systems, forgotten workers, and ordinary technologies lie buried in our own world today, waiting for future generations to rediscover their quiet brilliance?